It's been hard to ignore, hasn't it? All the talk about the markets lately.
Yeah, for sure.
You see a nearly 900-point drop in the Dow, and, well, it makes you stop and think,
Yeah,
especially with the S&P and NASDAQ kind of following suit.
yeah. It definitely seems like there's something bigger going on, right?
Exactly. So it's interesting, isn't it, how this kind of market turmoil we're seeing seems to coincide with President Trump's tariffs on, well, some pretty major trading partners.
It is. We're talking about Canada, Mexico, and China. So
Oh,
those are big players.
huge. And that's actually what we're going to deep dive into today, those tariff policies and how they've impacted the financial markets, at least in the short term.
Right.
We've been looking at this article called Trump's Tariff Policies and Market Turmoil, Smart Economic Strategy or Risky Gamble.
Catchy title.
Yeah, definitely grabs your attention. And it really presents like a good spectrum of viewpoints on all this.
It does. And what we're hoping to do today is kind of unpack the core arguments on both sides. So, are these policies actually a smart strategic play? Something that could lead to some really solid long-term economic benefits for the U.S.?
Right.
Or are they a gamble? A risky one, even, that could maybe even push us closer to a recession. It's interesting, President Trump himself has actually talked about this period of transition, which has definitely added to, I think, the whole recession anxiety.
No doubt about it. So let's break down the two main camps here.
Okay.
First, we'll dig into the reasons behind these policies, like why they were put in place and the arguments that support them leading to, hopefully, these long-term benefits.
Sounds good.
And then we got to look at the flip side, the possible downsides, those arguments warning about, some serious economic trouble.
Absolutely. Got to look at it all.
Right. So let's start with the immediate aftermath of these tariffs.
Yep.
What did we see happen in the markets?
Well, the initial reaction was kind of like a gut punch, A lot of uncertainty. It was clear investors were trying to make sense of it all. Like, what does this mean? How's this going to play out? And that drop in the stock market was like a big flashing warning sign.
Right. And it wasn't just a general feeling of uneasiness. There were some pretty concrete things happening.
Totally. A few things really converged. Obviously, the tariffs themselves targeting Canada, China, Mexico, and then that looming possibility of them going even higher. That didn't help.
No.
Then there was the whole recession worry, and, President Trump talking about that period of transition just added fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. And we can't forget the tech sector. The article specifically talks about these, what they call Magnificent Seven.
The big hitters.
Yeah. Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Tesla.
Yeah.
They all took some pretty serious hits.
Oh, yeah. Tesla, I think, had the roughest go of it. Something like a 15% drop in just one day. That's massive.
Ouch. And when those big names start to slide, well, it kind of drags the whole market down with them.
It does. Sentiment plays a huge role, right? And then you see the VIX, which is basically Wall Street's fear gauge, spike to its highest point this year.
Yeah, that's a pretty clear sign that people are nervous.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Super nervous.
So you've got this really negative response from the markets. But then on the other hand, the White House was saying, look, this is all part of a plan. We're aiming for historic growth. So, which is it? That's quite a difference in perspective.
Huge difference. And that difference, I think, shows just how complicated all of this is. It kind of sets the scene for us to understand these totally different arguments about these tariffs.
Right. Okay, so let's switch gears now and focus on the argument supporting President Trump's approach. The main idea here is basically, yeah, there might be some bumps in the road, some short-term pain, but in the long run, this is going to make the U.S. economy much stronger.
That's the hope.
Right. So let's start with the argument around protecting American jobs and industries. This is a big one, and it gets a lot of airtime.
Oh, yeah. It's a cornerstone. The basic idea is to shield U.S. manufacturing, steel production, agriculture from what they call unfair competition coming from other countries, make imports more expensive, encourage companies to make their products here, create jobs, boost the economy.
Makes sense on the surface. And the article lays out some specific examples of how this would work in certain sectors, like with China, for instance.
Yeah, the higher tariffs on goods from China are meant to kind of wean the U.S. off its reliance on Chinese manufacturing. It's kind of a way to say, hey, we need to build more stuff here. Then you've got, for instance, the increased tariffs on Canadian lumber and dairy. Those are meant to help American producers in those industries.
Right.
And the steel and aluminum tariffs, they're meant to, revive those industries here in the U.S., less reliance on foreign suppliers.
Got it. Okay, so another big argument in favor of these tariffs is reducing the U.S. trade deficit. Specifically, that big imbalance we have with China.
Yeah, President Trump has been really vocal about this. The article mentions that in 2024, the U.S. trade deficit with China was a whopping $382 billion. That's a lot. So we're importing way more from them than we're exporting to them. The idea with tariffs is to make Chinese imports more expensive, which could, in theory, encourage people and businesses here to buy American-made stuff instead.
Makes sense.
But it's not that simple, is it? Like, economists argue a lot about whether tariffs are the right tool here. Consumers end up paying more for stuff, and the deficit might just shift around to other countries. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's definitely not a straightforward fix. I mean, it makes you realize how complex global trade really is. Okay, moving on. The next argument for the tariffs centers around national security.
Right. The idea here is that these tariffs are actually a tool to protect the U.S., specifically from China's growing economic influence and things like drug trafficking coming from Mexico and Canada. So it's like using tariffs to push those countries to do things that are in line with U.S. interests, especially when it comes to security.
And how does that actually work? What examples does the article give?
So with China, the tariffs on certain tech products are meant to address concerns about intellectual property theft. That's considered a big security risk. And then for Mexico, those restrictions on imports are supposed to pressure them to step up border security to stop things like illegal activities.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's like, how much should economic policy be tied to national security goals? It's a bit of a blurry line.
Yeah, for sure. Makes you think. Okay, the next point the article makes is that these tariffs are supposed to encourage investment in the U.S.
Right. The logic is, if imports are more expensive, businesses are going to be more likely to invest in setting up shop here in the U.S.
Right,
That creates jobs, fuels the economy.
right. And I think the White House has actually put some numbers on this, right? Like how much investment they've seen come in since these policies went into effect. Yeah, they've said that trillions of dollars in new investment has been pledged since President Trump's election. The article also mentions all the deregulation the administration's been doing, the idea being that that would also make the U.S. a more attractive place for businesses.
Okay. So the last argument in support of these tariffs is basically, yeah, things are a little rough now, but hang in there. It's going to be great in the long run. It's that short-term pain for long-term gain kind of thing.
Yeah, those who support the tariffs say that, sure, economic transitions can be messy, but in the end, this is all going to lead to better trade deals for the U.S., a stronger economy overall. The article even talks about historical examples where protectionist policies actually helped revitalize industries. The idea is once those new trade deals are in place, the markets will calm down and the economic benefits will start rolling in.
Yeah, it makes you think about those historical parallels. Okay, so we've covered the arguments for these tariffs, focusing on those potential long-term benefits.
Hmm.
But now we need to shift gears and look at the other side, the potential downsides, those arguments that say, hey, this could actually be really bad for the economy.
Yeah, we got to do that.
And the first thing that jumps out, especially after that market reaction we talked about, is the whole instability thing, the risk of investors just panicking.
Yeah, that big drop in the stock market, that wasn't just a blip. It was a sign that investors are seriously lacking confidence in these economic policies. And all this uncertainty around tariffs and trade, it can make the markets go haywire, which can really hurt economic growth.
Yeah. And the article doesn't hold back when describing just how bad that market reaction was.
Not at all. It says the Dow's almost 900-point drop was the worst single-day loss all year, wiping out any gains since the election. And then you've got those losses in the Magnificent Seven, those tech giants. That really amplified the fear, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And people buying up bonds, that's another classic sign that investors are running for cover, looking for safer bets because they're worried about the economy.
Right, exactly.
Okay, another major concern is that all of this is going to end up costing consumers and businesses more money.
Hmm.
How exactly do tariffs lead to higher prices?
So basically, a tariff is like a tax on imports. When those goods become more expensive to bring into the country, those costs get passed down the line. So consumers end up paying more for stuff, everyday stuff like food, household goods, all kinds of things that come from Canada and Mexico.
Right.
And businesses that rely on imported materials, they're hit hard too. I mean, think about companies that make cars, electronics, machinery. Those imported parts are going to cost more.
Yeah.
And that means either the business eats that cost, which hurts their profits, or they raise prices on their products.
Fine.
So consumers get hit again. The article also talks about how industries with these complex global supply chains are especially vulnerable because tariffs can really mess things up. They drive up costs, make things less efficient. It's like who ends up paying the price here? The foreign exporter, the
Hmm.
American importer, the people buying the stuff.
It's a good question. It's not an easy answer. Okay, next up, we have this whole threat of other countries retaliating, right?
Yeah.
Putting their own tariffs on U.S. goods. And that could escalate into a full-blown trade war.
Yeah, that's a real worry. I mean, countries aren't going to just sit back and do nothing when these tariffs hit them. The article mentions that Canada, Mexico, and China, they've all said they're either thinking about or already planning to put their own tariffs on American goods.
Right, and the article gives some specific examples, too.
Yeah, it does. Canada's talking about tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, which would hurt American farmers big time. And then you've got China. They have a massive market, right? So they could easily make it harder for American companies to do business there, which could really damage their sales. And the worst case scenario is that this turns into a trade war.
That would be bad.
Yeah, it would be terrible for global trade, but especially for the U.S. It would hurt our exports, make American businesses less competitive.
Right. And all of that leads us to probably the scariest thought of all.
Yeah.
A recession. We even heard President Trump kind of dance around that question when he was asked about it. How could these tariffs actually lead to a recession?
Well, a lot of economists are really worried about this. They're saying that all this uncertainty about trade, combined with prices going up because of the tariffs, could really slow down the economy. And we're already seeing layoffs in some industries that are getting hit hard by these tariffs.
Yeah.
And then you've got consumers getting nervous. They're worried about prices going up, about losing their jobs. And when consumers get scared, they stop spending money. And consumer spending, that's a huge driver of our economy. A recession is basically when the economy shrinks for a while. And all these things we're talking about, they could definitely push us in that direction.
That's not what we want to see.
Definitely not.
Okay, the last thing the article talks about is how all of this has strained relationships with our allies.
Yeah, it's definitely caused some friction, especially with Canada and Mexico. Those are close trading partners, you know. Putting tariffs on them, it's created some tension.
Yeah.
The Canadian Prime Minister even called these policies a serious mistake.
Yeah, that's pretty strong language.
It is. And Mexico's thinking about doing something similar, taking some kind of action in response. It's not just about the trade either, right? All this uncertainty and tension around U.S. foreign policy, it can have a ripple effect on global markets, make it harder to work together on other important issues.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's look ahead a bit. What should we be watching for as all of this plays out?
Well, there are a few key areas to keep an eye on. First, how did the markets react? Do things settle down, or does the volatility continue?
Right.
Then you've got the economic indicators like GDP growth, job numbers, inflation. Those will tell us a lot about the real impact of these tariffs. And internationally, our country is going to try to work things out. Or will we see more retaliation? Consumer behavior is another one. Are people going to cut back on spending if prices keep rising? And then, of course, we need to pay attention to what the Trump administration does if they make any changes to these policies.
Right. So it all comes back to that big question, doesn't it? Are these tariffs a good move for the U.S. economy in the long run, or are they a risky gamble that could backfire?
Yeah. And the honest answer is we don't know for sure. There are strong arguments on both sides.
Right.
The article makes it clear that the future is uncertain. And the actual impact of these tariffs is probably going to depend on a bunch of different things. Economic factors, political factors, global events.
Right. It's complex.
Super complex.
Well, it definitely gives us all a lot to think about. And we'd love to hear what you think about all this, too. So if you have any thoughts, any insights on this whole tariff issue, leave a comment below. Let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because these are things that affect all of us, right?
They do.